Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our council meeting for Monday, August the 28th of 2023. The recommendation is that we go into a closed meeting of council in accordance with Section 239(2)D, Section 239(2)B, and Section 239(2)H, Section 239(2)I, and to consider the following. 1. Corporate Services, Section 239(2)D, Labor Relations or Employee Negotiations, and Section 239(2)B, Personal Matters about an Identifiable Individual. And for the second point, confidential information supplied in confidence from the Province of Ontario, which is Section 239(2)H, information explicitly supplied in confidence to the municipality or local board by Canada, a province or territory, or a Crown agency of any item. And Section 239(2)I, a trade secret or scientific, technical, commercial, or financial or labor relations information supplied in confidence to the municipality or local board, which, if disclosed, could reasonably be expected to prejudice significantly the competitive position or inferior significantly with the contractual or other negotiations of a person, group of persons, or an organization. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Cressman, seconded by Councillor Dunstall. All those in favour? Thank you very much. So we will proceed to closed, and our open meeting will start at 7 p.m. Good evening and welcome to our regular council meeting for Monday, August 28th, 2023. So if we could please reconvene in open session at 7 p.m. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? And that is carried. Our moment of reflection. Childhood Cancer Month is observed in September every year to raise awareness about childhood cancer and to support children and families affected by this disease. It is an opportunity to show solidarity and support for those affected by childhood cancer. Please visit the Canadian Cancer Society at cancer.ca for more information. September is also Suicide Prevention Month. The goal is to educate the public about the warning signs of suicide, promote resources, and support individuals struggling with suicidal thoughts and reduce the stigma surrounding mental health issues. Please visit the Canadian Mental Health Association at cmha.ca for more information on mental health. I will now call on Councillor Martin for the territorial and acknowledgement, please.
Thank you, Mayor Salonen. We have gathered in Wilmot Township on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga peoples. We also want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and Mother Earth. We should take only what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community.
Thank you very much. And are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, we do have an addition to the agenda. Item 14.2 has been, sorry, I'm just making sure, presented or added? Okay, sorry, has been added to the bylaws this evening. So for the adoption of the agenda, please note that bylaw 14.1, being a bylaw to provide drainage works for the construction and implementation of the Bamberg Creek, Johanna, and Kosh lease municipal drains are being pulled from this agenda, and this bylaw will come forward at a further meeting. So with the addition and the removal in our bylaws for this evening, may I please have a mover to approve the agenda for tonight? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? And that carries. In terms of minutes from our previous meeting, the recommendation is that the minutes be adopted as presented for July 24th regular council meeting. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Sadhu, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. We have one item for this evening's public meeting. We will hear all interested people who wish to speak on these matters. If the decisions of Council of the Township of Wilmot are appealed at the Ontario Land Tribunal, the tribunal has the power to dismiss an appeal if you do not speak at the public meeting or make a written submission before the bylaw is passed. I now declare this public meeting open. Persons attending as delegations at this meeting for any of these items are required to leave their names and addresses, which will become part of the public record, and you are hereby advised that this information may be posted on the Township's official website along with your email address if provided. I would like to remind all delegates for this evening of some guidelines for participation. Applicants and agents for the applicants have 10 minutes to speak. All other delegations will be given 7 minutes to speak. We also ask that you leave the meeting once, if you're joining us virtually, that you leave the meeting once your issue has been addressed. However, you can then view on YouTube or you can remain in the chambers. And if you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in immediate muting and removal from the meeting, which includes interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others, hate speech, or defamatory comments. So this is item 9.1, which is the kennel application for Noble Canine on Notre Dame Street in St. Agatha. And we will get the recommendation on the floor, and the recommendation is that report COR 2023-53 be received for information. To get this on the floor, may I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Sadoo, seconded by Councillor Dunstall. And so again, this public meeting is in respect to kennel application, Noble Canine, 2108 Notre Dame Drive, St. Agatha. And Ms. Merritt, I believe that you are here to introduce our report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Through the mayor. Tonight's public meeting and the staff report before you is regarding a new dog kennel application that was received in July. Noble Canine is applying to have a kennel operating as a training and boarding facility at 2108 Notre Dame Drive, which is just outside of St. Agatha, with a maximum of 20 dogs. As per the bylaw, property owners within a 150-meter radius of the subject property have been notified of tonight's meeting. To date, we have not received any correspondence regarding this application. The proposed kennel meets zoning requirements and bylaw requirements as detailed in the staff report. It should be noted that this property was once a kennel many years ago, and the proposed kennel would be utilizing the existing structure, fenced areas, along with completing necessary upgrades to the building. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have, as I will be bringing back a recommendation to council on the September 11th meeting regarding this application.
Thank you very much, Ms. Merritt. And Councillor Cressman.
Yes, I believe there was a previous application when they were attempting to have this kennel on Trustler Road on the edge of Mannheim. That being said, there was some training that would occur on weekends when different participants would bring dogs to the site for training, and then as I understood, they would return because there wasn't kennel facilities there. Does the 20 dogs that are involved as a maximum include any that are there for a temporary time, or is that over and above if they were there for training for a single day or whatever?
Thank you for the question through the mayor. That is correct. At any one time, there would be a maximum of 20 dogs allowed on the site, whether they're staying over or just there for the day, for training or anything, but it's a 20 dog max on the property.
Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. There was a note here that there was ventilation and ductwork that needed to be done, but it has not. So that's going to be in there as a condition that needs to be met once it's granted. Is that correct?
Thank you through the mayor. That is correct. As noted, the building on site currently is an older building. The applicant is going to be leasing the site from the property owner, and we do have a letter that the property owner is on board with this and in support of this business occurring. However, the applicant didn't want to do work to the building if a kennel license wasn't going to be granted.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, it does mention in there primarily German Shepherds will be on site. Is this meant to be like a police dog training facility? Do you know much about that?
Thank you. Through the mayor. I think that question may be better asked by the applicant, and I believe the applicant is delegating tonight, so if I can push the question to him, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Yes, Councillor Wilkinson.
And through the chair, just another question of general information. Where else do we have licensed kennels located within Wilmot? I know there's a total of 5.
Thank you, through the mayor. Okay, this is one question I wasn't ready for, but I know where our kennels are. So we have one just outside of Phillipsburg. It's a breeding kennel. There's a large kennel on Trustler Road that mainly does boarding of dogs. There's 2 smaller kennels on the Bethel Road. There's another one. It's on my way to New Dundee on one of the small country roads. Whitmer Road. Yes, thank you very much. I've driven by it, but I couldn't remember where it was.
Very good. Any other questions? I believe we've kept Ms. Merritt on her toes tonight. All right, seeing none, thank you very much. And we do have one registered delegation for this matter, and they're going to be participating over Zoom. Before I call on them, I do just want to make note so that both council and the general public know tonight is not a decision on approving this, it is just for information. So if you are watching online and want to make comments, that would be at the September meeting when this comes back to council for a final recommendation. So now I will turn it over to our applicant, Mr. Ruff. You, I believe, are joining us over Zoom, and you will have 10 minutes to speak, please. We can see you. You can go ahead if you can hear us.
Awesome. Good evening to our council members as well as our mayor. My name is Rayan Rofe. I am speaking on behalf of Noble Canine, our company, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions at all. This is for, like previously mentioned by Ms. Erin Merritt, this is for the kennel application at 2108 Notre Dame Drive. I'd just like to start off by addressing the question that we had that Ms. Erin passed on to myself. Sure, the company logo might be a German Shepherd, but we are open to all breeds. We train mostly pet dogs, the average family pet dog, and we have had, over the last 2 years, we've trained and sold 2 police dogs, but that is not the main objective of our business. I'd also like to make note that we are not at all a breeding kennel. We don't plan to be having any breedings at all, and it would primarily be just specifically for training. The site proposed is 2108 Notre Dame Drive, like said, and the existing kennel would definitely go major renovations and upgrades should the kennel license or even a temporary kennel license be passed. Other than that, I would just like to open the floor to any questions if possible. As Ms. Merritt has been more than helpful in kind of setting the stage and getting all the information needed out there.
Very good. Thank you very much. Councillors, any additional questions then? Okay, seeing none, we thank you very much for joining us this evening, and we'll see you in September then.
See you then. Thank you.
Take care. Okay, would the clerk please indicate if there is any other persons present, either in person or online, who wishes to address council on this matter? Okay, seeing none, for a second and last time, would the clerk please indicate if anybody has since indicated they'd like to speak? Okay, very good. Seeing none, I will now call the vote that we received this for information. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Stu, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? And that carries. And I think I maybe moved and seconded that twice tonight, so my apologies on that, but thanks for humoring me. We do not have any presentations this evening. As for our consent agenda, before I read the recommendation, does anybody want to remove anything from this before we carry on? Councillor Crestman?
Is this one with the Delta Rising drain? I'd like to have that removed.
Okay. Yep, we can remove that point. So you can go ahead with your comments now and we'll do the consent tab. If you could just turn on your microphone, Councillor.
Through you, Mayor, which I forgot previously, and I apologize for that. Through you, Mayor, I know our drainage superintendent wanted to be in attendance, and he knew he was going to be late. So I think there was some question about this is a new company that we haven't done business with before, and there's a letter of recommendation I think that's accompanying it that indicates that other municipalities have been pleased with the work that has been conducted by them, and I know in personal conversation with our drainage superintendent. He said initially it seemed to him a little strange because he hadn't heard about this company, but when he did investigated and talked to other municipalities, they were in agreement that they did a good job, and therefore the letter of recommendation that accompanied it. And so I think that was the gist, if I'm pinch hitting, for our drainage superintendent this evening. I don't know if Director Molenhouse has anything further to add.
Through you, Mayor, we were initially of the same opinion. We saw the contract or the tender close, and we're doing the same sort of review process with the contractor that was the low bid. And yes, you are correct. The letter does speak to that it is a contractor that's completed work in other municipalities and has had a positive review.
Very good. Any other questions or comments, Councillor Cressman or others? No? All right, so since that was removed, we need to vote on 11.2 specifically. So may I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Cressman, seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. All those in favor? That carries. And then back to the regular consent agenda, which really is only item 11.1. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Sadhu. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. On to our reports. We have report 12.1, which is councillor use of civic space policy, and the recommendation is that council adopts the corporate policy relating to councillor use of civic space. To get this on the floor, may I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Cressman, and I will now call on our Manager of Legislative Services and our Clerk, Jeff Bunn, to introduce the report.
Great, thank you, Mayor. So following the May 8th, 2023 council meeting, staff researched municipal best practices relating to the use of municipal facilities to conduct constituency business by individual members of council. That is a result of a notice of motion that council had endorsed. In short, the draft policy before you today has provided the parameters, fee structure, and booking logistics whereby councillors can book and use civic space for constituency events and meetings. The policy is being developed under the following principles. Councillors need to communicate with their constituents concerning the meetings and activities of Wilmot Council and its committees, as well as the business and services of the township. Township civic space should be made available for councillors' occasional use for constituent events and meetings. The health and safety of staff working at the facilities or the safety and security of the public users of the facility should not be adversely affected by the councillors' usage of that space, and the ability for the township divisions to deliver their programs and their services at those facilities should not be adversely impacted by the councillors' use of those space. Before I open up for questions, I do want to highlight that this was a very good collaborative effort between myself and staff within the corporate services and community services departments, and I just want to thank them for their help on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cressman.
Through you, Mayor, I had one question, and I might be one of those obvious questions that it is included, but if you were trying to communicate some regional news, would it be appropriate in that first bullet to have councillors need to communicate with their constituents concerning activities of Wilmot Council / Regional Council? I'm looking because.
So you'd be referring to like that roundabout meeting, or do you mean just that if people have questions in general, I could host them in my office?
Well, I think the question I have is I was contemplating a meeting for Mannheim residents who keep inquiring about what's going to happen with Trustler Road, with all the new subdivisions that are being added east of Trustler Road in the city of Kitchener. We can't get out of our subdivision now. We're having to take a circuitous route, and I saw the need to have a meeting with regional road staff to understand what the long-term plan is for Trustler Road, and especially as new subdivisions come on stream south of Bleams in the city of Kitchener and then west of Trustler in the city of Kitchener. They're building homes there right now, and it's just exasperating a traffic situation, and I think it's owed to those residents to understand what the long-term plans are.
I'll turn it over to CAO Chambers to make comment.
I guess I have a question for staff. Has the region typically paid the rental fee on those? Like, as an example, for the roundabout, did the region pay that? So I would expect that regional business, if there was a public meeting to be held, that the region would actually pay facilities rent within Wilmot.
So I can actually jump in on that. From the back end, my understanding is that the region did pay to rent the space in our facility for the roundabout, that they hosted the regional meeting. Yes, I see you have another question.
So the follow-up question is, that was on their initiative on a, it was initiated here in the township? Okay, so that's what I was thinking of, is if I call a meeting for them to explain long-term planning for Trustor Road, is it on my dime? Is it on the township dime? Is it on the region's dime? So.
Through you, Mayor, really the Township of Wilmot Council is representing Township of Wilmot business, so this would strictly be for Wilmot issues. And I think if you were working with the region on those one-offs to hold public meetings, that you would work through the regional staff and they would pay for facility rent.
Very good. Any other councillors to do?
Through the mayor to Mr. Bunn. Question, so the region of Waterloo does not have any policy regarding this, so we kind of piggybacked off of something in Toronto. At the heart of this motion was essentially being able to meet with constituents in an office space, in a private setting. Right now, if I had a constituent call me today, say we need to meet tomorrow, chances are we have to go to like the Tim Hortons. And in my meetings with some constituents at the local Tim Hortons, they kind of look at me like, why can't we go to the township complex, which is next door, and meet in an office? A lot of times they're not comfortable talking in a public setting because they have to talk about their neighbors, bylaws, whatever the case. So I think we kind of missed the point of what the original motion was. I agree that we need a policy for larger, if we're holding more public events and whatever the case is. But the main difference between us and Toronto is all the councillors have offices there. We don't have any office space. So I'd just like for you to comment on that.
Absolutely. So through you, Mayor, the policy was drafted with the boardrooms of the admin complex in mind. So we can use, or council can use smaller spaces within this facility itself. Likewise, within the community centers, there are some smaller-ish boardrooms. They are a little bit larger in multipurpose rooms. But keeping that in mind, that we don't have the space, the office space within the admin complex itself. To be honest, the scope was for boardrooms as the smallest space that we could offer.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Through you, Mayor. So thank you for crafting this, first and foremost, just as a general comment. And I think my observation is it does do a good job of sort of governing those larger scale meetings and sort of outlining, hey, we need a couple of days notice, a proper booking, and an understanding of what the meeting would be, i.e. a town hall, a business update, a public meeting, something along those lines. I will say I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Sidhu in his comments, in that I think personally when I put this forward, one of the missing areas I saw was the access to the township office. And to his point, we don't have availability of offices. We can't get into this building after hours at a moment's notice to utilize the space that I think ultimately we're looking to. So I kind of want to have the debate and the conversation amongst my colleagues here, but I think ultimately we like the larger scale layout of this policy. But what we're looking to achieve is that if I get a call from a constituent at 6 o'clock and they say, hey, I can meet tonight or tomorrow night, having to jump through those hoops to book those meetings and get in here, we need a space that's sort of a neutral ground that doesn't include one of our residences or an establishment locally where we can have a private, close conversation. So if we set it up so that we can have access to certain rooms, have access to this building, whether that be after hours or weekend, when it's appropriate to conduct business with constituents is what I'm personally after, because it's presented itself a few times over the last year. So that's what I'm looking for, and I think it could be achieved through a variety of methods, and I'll leave it to staff to come up with. But I almost feel like that should be a separate piece of the policy that needs to be addressed. And then I think in some of those cases, you know, if we define what are the limitations of this meeting, how many people, you know, are we looking at saying there's going to be little to no costs associated with things like that? So that's comment number one, and I'd be curious to hear what my colleagues have to say about that, but I certainly feel that there's a need to get access to an office type of environment, whether that be private office, boardrooms, meeting room, at a small scale here at this facility. I mean, let's face it, this belongs to the township. The township should have the right to use it, and we do represent the people. With that, I have a couple other follow-ups that we can address. I did look at section 5.7 of the policy, which basically says that if there was a problem with the way the policy was used, you know, we would essentially have to go and have a meeting with the CAO. I think we have a pretty good relationship with CAO chambers. However, I look at that and I wonder sometimes, is that potentially maybe overreaching too far? I think at the end of the day, we're elected officials here. We have a certain level of trust that was put upon us by the citizens of this township. So don't know that we need to include that policy, and I worry about how that could be used moving forward. And then ultimately, section 7.2 is just that, you know, last minute meetings or bookings is sort of what we intended to address in this case. So again, I take the work that you did on the large scale meetings as excellent, but I think we need to branch out and have a separate section that sort of details out, hey, I'm going to meet you in a half hour at the township. Let's have a conversation. So that's all I have to say about that.
Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I would agree with both Councillor Sadhu and Councillor Wilkinson. I think that having an office here that we could use would provide confidentiality for our constituents, as well as, I believe, anytime we get an opportunity to bring our residents into our beautiful establishment here so that they can see the workings of what they pay for is good. And I think it just shows the professionalism that we're taking what they're talking about seriously. And we're not going to be interrupted to ask if you want something in your latte. So I do agree with both councillors.
Any other questions or comments, councillors? Councillor Wilkinson.
So through you, Mayor, should we move at this point to have an amendment to potentially push this out to the September 11th meeting and include those policies?
Through you, Mayor, I would recommend that council receives the report as information, and staff will take this away and bring back something at the next meeting.
Okay. Yeah. So I'd like to amend that we'll receive this for information with the expectation that we'll get this back at the next meeting, September 11th. That's doable? Okay.
Very good. So that is moved by Councillor Wilkinson, seconding Councillor Martin, or question?
I was hoping to make a comment
Yes,
before
of course.
but I guess have you formally moved it then? Is that?
You can still make your question.
Okay,
Yep.
so I guess my comment is to add further support to what Councillor Dunstall, Councillor Sadhu, and Councillor Wilkinson have been saying, is that having a space, well, in fact, across the township, it seems to me that there are numerous buildings that regularly sit empty. And we're not looking to create extra work for staff. We're looking for having a space to talk to constituents where it doesn't always seem appropriate at Tim Hortons or Mimi's or, well, Mimi's is outside, so if it's raining, it makes it difficult. So, yes, I would add support to this.
Very good. Councillor Sadhu?
Just to echo off what Councillor Martin is saying, it doesn't necessarily have to be this complex. We have numerous buildings throughout our township. Sometimes people in New Hamburg, it's just easier to meet at the rec center or a building that's close by. So just give options of common areas that, as Councillor Martin said, regularly do sit empty, so we're really not incurring any more costs by booking it out for a half hour or an hour.
Councillor Martin?
To add one more comment to what I'm saying is if I create a mess, I'll be happy to clean it up. I'm not asking staff to clean up after me. I will clean up any mess I make.
We very much appreciate that. On that, just the one comment I was going to make on 7.2, which is just that meetings/events should be booked at a normal permitted timelines. Context of larger scale events, completely agree. I think just in the context of what they're sharing, because I know certainly, I mean, we even just had residents show up this evening who called me at 6 p.m. tonight and showed up like an hour later. I think just for flexibility of what council is looking at, if we can maybe see a way that that can be more flexible to suit the needs of residents. Now, we do technically have this amendment moved. Oh, I see Director Catania. Do you have a comment to make?
Through you, Mayor Salonen, and through working with Mr. Clerk there, I realize as well that sometimes on short notice it will be difficult for some of the settlement community buildings, obviously going through our permitting department, but I'll be working with our clerk to make sure procedurally we're able to flush that out further and look at, even for the admin building here as well, some kind of space that can be used on short notice.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Now, may I please have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Stu. Anybody, bless you, anybody on either side have any additional questions or comments? Okay. Oh, yes, Councillor.
Through you, Chair, can we just get a reading of the amended motion here that we're voting on, please?
That corporate policy relating to councillor use of council civic space be received as information.
Brought, the recommendation is brought back, or do you not need that actual direction written? Okay, very good. So the timeline of staff direction doesn't need to actually be written down if that works for council. But we will see it again coming back on September the 11th. And any final comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Now on to item 12.2, which is our fall debenture issuance. And the recommendation is that report COR 2023-55 be received for information purposes, and further that council approve the issuance of development charges fund debentures towards the following approved 2023 capital projects: new parks operation facility for $3.55 million, and provision for public works facility expansion for $1,080,000, and Union Street storm outlet replacement for $104,500, and the Bridge Street Bridge number 43B T9 for just over $300,000, and further that staff be directed to postpone issuing debt for the Snyders Road, Foundry Street, and Baden Trunk sanitary sewer project further until further analysis is completed and presented to council, and further that staff be reassigned the existing levy fund debenture of $484,750 from the third ice pad project to the Nith River Promenade project. To get this on the floor, may I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Cressman, seconded by Councillor Martin. I will now call on our Director of Corporate Services and Treasurer, Patrick Kelly, to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Mayor Salonen. This report provides an update for Council on the fall debenture issuance, as well as the proposed reassignment of levy-funded debentures from the third ice pad project. So as part of our 2023 municipal budget, Council approved just over $18 million in funding to support the entire 2023 capital program. The funding included $3.4 million in levy-funded debt, just under $9 million in development charge funding, and just over $3 million from water and sanitary reserve funds. Considering the significant capital outlays required from the development charges specifically, the majority of this funding was originally anticipated to be supported through debentures. As outlined within the report, staff are recommending that a portion of the DC-funded debentures be postponed until 2024, when it's expected that the actual capital outlays will occur. This in turn will lower the township's debt servicing costs within 2024, also giving further time for DC reserve funds to rebuild themselves. Similar to the DC-funded debentures, funding from the Sanitary Reserve Fund and other levy-funded debt for the same underground initiatives, as noted in the report, would also be postponed until 2024. In total, staff are recommending to Council that $5.03 million in DC-funded debt and $770,000 of levy-funded debt be included within the region's fall debenture issuance, and also that the existing $484,000 in debt financing that was issued for the third ice pad design now be transferred to fund the Nith River Promenade project. So that movement would lower the debt issuance on the levy-funded debt side for this year, as those funds for the third ice pad design are not needed within the current year. We'd shift them over to the Nith River Promenade project, which is ongoing, as you can see, in downtown New Hamburg. A key piece of information within the report is in regards to the annual debt servicing payments from development charges. With this approach of postponing some of it, we'd still be looking at approximately $870,000 of annual DC-funded debenture payments, which further underscores the importance of DC collections and the timing of development projects within the municipality. Also, the postponement does give time for the incoming treasurer for the municipality to undertake some further analysis of DC cash flows with staff and or external consultants and come up with a game plan going forward on when it would be most appropriate to issue that debt, ensuring that we have the funds in place to service that debt over the long term. All that being said, staff in Wilmot are continuing to be committed to pursuing any external funding sources that are out there to offset the debt requirements for these large-scale infrastructure initiatives, and we'll always report back to Council on any successes there are in obtaining grant funding. So the report has a lengthy recommendation, which I appreciate you reading. Mayor Dunstall, a lot of numbers in there, but staff are just making sure that the appropriate debt is issued to allow projects to move forward and also allow the township to service that debt in 2024. So I'd take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cressman.
Yes, through you, Mayor. I realize that the region issues debentures spring and fall, and what's the time frame that is issued? So if we delay till the interim treasurer gets familiar with this, would we pass that significant deadline for the issuance of the debentures for the fall period?
Through you, Mayor Salonen, I would say that this report is seeking the approval of council to move forward with the fall debt issuance for the specific projects outlined within it. It's the postponed projects, the projects not being postponed, sorry, the postponed debt issuance for the spring issuance. There'd be sufficient time for the interim treasurer to get up to speed on that. This project, as far as DC cash flows goes, has been ongoing throughout most of this fiscal year. We're using an external consultant to peer review some of our projections on DCs. Ultimately, we would have liked that report to come forward at the same time, but the data is not there yet. So we do have some time in between now and, like I said, the actual capital outlays on those projects happening to allow further analysis.
Follow-up for Councillor Cressman.
Just to follow up on that, so the Baden Trunk Sanitary Sewer and these other projects, Snyder Road, et cetera, aren't being postponed, they're ongoing. It's just that the bills aren't coming due till next year, and so there's no sense having debt on one side of the ledger and paying interest and not having to pay them till next year. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Salonen, and that's one thing I'll miss is your questions in council chambers, because that really hammers home the point that we wanted to make in the report. We're not postponing these projects. We're postponing the issuance of debt on those projects. So very well said. Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Wilkins.
Through you, Mayor. Patrick, thank you for the work you've done at the Township of Wilmot for the last number of years, considerable number of years. We do appreciate it. And I appreciate my colleagues' questions here. One of the things that I did inquire about earlier today, I think my understanding through CAO Chambers here was that we can potentially have up until September 11th at a minimum to sort of reconsider this whole report. I think we've got some time with the region still. So based on the fact that we do have budget season upcoming, we also have a new interim or incoming CFO to look at our finances and guide us through the budget season. I'd like to actually move that we defer this debate until September 11th and add an amendment that we will have the interim CFO review this, look at any impacts it will have to our upcoming budget, as well as tax requirements and implications associated with this, so that we can have an accurate report on September 11th to consider before we choose to move forward with this.
Okay, so you're moving that we defer this, correct?
Yes, with the instruction that the interim CFO reviews and comes back with a budget-related report based on this.
So I would need a seconder for that, seconded by Councillor Sajou. Any comments or questions on the deferral of this to our next council meeting? Okay, seeing none, we will now vote. Oh, yes, Councillor Cressman?
So this is to CAO Chambers about the advisability of doing that. Are we going to cut our timelines too short? Is it going to put us in a financial pinch?
So it's my understanding, and Director Kelly can perhaps back this up. We've been working with the Manager of Finance, Ashton Romney, as well. And it's my understanding that the region is desirous of getting this done, so because they're doing the debt issuance for all of the area municipalities. So until we get this passed, that does hold up the rest of the municipalities, but they did indicate at the very latest they would need a decision by September 11th.
Councillor Cressman for a follow-up.
Yeah, given that, I would speak against deferral on this. I see the importance of moving forward. These are projects that are ongoing. We achieve some saving by not issuing debt when it isn't required, but I would speak against deferring it to the 11th.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on the deferral? Okay, Councillor Martin?
Through you, Mayor Salonen, I guess I'm not sure whom to address this question. Maybe Director Kelly, maybe CAO Chambers, or maybe if Councillor Cressman wants to speak further on it. I had heard Director Kelly say that this does not hold back or delay any of these projects. So I'm a little confused by what Councillor Cressman is commenting on. And if we wait until September the 11th, does that mean that any project would be delayed?
Sure, I can handle that. Through you, Mayor Salonen. No, there's no anticipation that these projects would be delayed at this point in time. The outlays, there's a large amount of work, processing, design, planning, tendering that needs to happen before the actual capital outlays happen. That's why we feel it's appropriate to, from my perspective and from staff's perspective, to postpone those debt issuances. Again, giving more time to analyze it and factor it into the 2024 budget process. So you have a clear understanding as to how much debt servicing costs you'll be looking at.
Does that answer your question? Very good. Any other questions or comments on the deferral of this to September 11th? And just to make note, in the why it is September 11th, because there's a regional committee date on the 12th of September on which this, along with all of the other area municipalities, debt issuances will be coming forward. So that is why it is a September 11th deadline. Councillor Dunstall.
Sorry, as you're speaking, through you, Mayor, as you're speaking, I'm just wondering, does all of the other municipalities are getting their numbers in, correct? And so I'm just asking, having ours go in right at the wire, does that impact any, that perhaps the funding wouldn't be available, it would be given someone else? I'm not quite familiar with that process.
Sure. Through you, Mayor Salonen. So essentially, the region would be going out to brokerages and to agencies, fiscal agents, to discuss the debt issuance, negotiating with them on best rates, et cetera. So the time, a lead time for them obviously is going to help considerably in them putting together a fulsome portfolio of what the issuance is on behalf of all municipalities. So holding it to the last minute, or not the last minute, but holding it till September 11th obviously will back up a little bit of the workload at the regional setting. But I'm sure they would still put in the efforts to get our numbers in if it were to wait until then.
Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Salonen. So then my question is, if we delay it till September the 11th, does that mean that staff have to work overtime to get the report to the region on September 12th?
Through you, Mayor Salonen, no. That essentially is just a memo that would go from staff to the region that says that the township would require this much debt within the issuance.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Through you, Mayor, and to my colleagues and just in general, I would say, again, we have some good information at hand here, but I still think that there's a lot of questions specifically coming up with the budget season and what some of the impacts. So what I'm asking for here is that we get our incoming interim CFO to look at this information, report back with his opinion based on where he sees the finances and his assessment, as well as how this might affect the budget process. Given that we've got the timeline for that to happen, I think out of respect for our taxpayers' dollars, we're asking our taxpayers to take on that debt burden. I think it's a reasonable thing to do to get more information back from a fresh set of eyes, in my opinion, just as we move forward in this process. So that's my reasoning to defer. I think based on the conversation, if we defer to September 11th, we'll still have that brought up at the committee meeting at the regional level to get what our needs are.
Councillor Cressman.
Yeah, I would disagree because you don't have any runway left to do anything alternate planning if you're making your decision on September the 11th, and against which background a decision has to be made that night with very little either ors. These are projects that we as a council agreed to. We anticipated taking on debt. We're taking on less debt than what we anticipated, and to my mind, move on. Let's get on with it. Yes, there will be lots of other things that our new treasurer will have to understand and come to grips with, and its impact on our budget. To revisit items that we've already decided on, to my mind, is just re-plowing the same field.
Very good. Thank you. All right. Are those all the comments and questions? So we now vote on the motion to defer. So all those in favor? Okay. And all those opposed? And that's a stalemate. So, okay. So that fails. So with that having failed, then we go back to the motion that is on the floor. It has already been moved and seconded. So any other questions or comments on the issuance of debentures before we vote on this? Councillor Wilkinson.
So you made a comment in the report, through you, Mayor. The comment in the report was that we are estimating a finance rate at 5%. I'm just curious where you can get that number right now and how that's being worked into the budget. That's one of the main questions I have. What are the terms? How is that locked in for 20 years? What are the 5-year? I mean, I just look at that number and I look at what rates are going for around town right now. I don't know what we're going to be able to plan our budget around that 5% right now, and these are one of the questions that I have. Additionally, what is the holdup on DC collections? These are some of the things that I have questions about. There's no question regarding the projects that we have discussed and plan to move forward with. Just looking to make sure that we get the appropriate financial information from someone who will be at the helm moving forward.
Director Kelly, do you? Well, it was comments on the rate and.
Yeah, I can thank you, Mayor Salen. I can speak to some of those. So the rate at 5% was a conservative estimate based on the rates that the region has projected receiving at this point in time. I can't get into the specifics of their rates, but they were at last look below the 5% mark on the size of the portfolio that they would be putting out. The second piece is regards to terms. The township, and when we issued debt last year, felt it was advantageous, and this council did, to issue debt a 20-year term for assets that would last at least 20 years or more, and to put in a 10-year refresh on it so we could renegotiate at the 10-year mark. I would assume the incoming treasurer would want to move. That's a favorable debt term to look at. As far as the impact on the property tax base, I feel Ashton does a fairly good job of outlining that and making council aware of what to expect when this debt is taken on, and that is going to be a burden on the tax base. Much smaller in this debt issuance than last year. We're looking at $770,000 approximately of levy-funded debt. The majority of it is on the DC side, and as I spoke to in the preliminary commentary on this report, it does underscore the importance of DC collections, the timing of development and collections, so that the funds coming into the municipality are sufficient enough to service the debt payments. There are municipalities across the province that are in this same circumstance. This is not unique to Wilmot. Large, fast-growing municipalities that have a lot of growth coming on rather quickly and don't have a plethora of development charges sitting and waiting are grappling with the same issue, and we're all trying to find alternative methods and strategies to appropriately do it. So I would feel comfortable that the incoming treasurer would think likewise on that, but again, that's in council's hands to decide.
Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I also want to make sure that I understand, and Director Kelly, you and I have had this conversation, but I want to make it public, that the $484,750 levy-funded debenture taken from the third ice pad over to the promenade, that debt we've already incurred, right? So we're paying for that monthly, so it would make no sense to not use that money when we're actually incurring a cost for it. I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that that third ice rink still is out there in the ether somewhere, and that there are a lot of parents, both skating clubs who can't get their kids in because there's no space, and hockey teams that are fighting for ice time. So I just wanted to get that out there. All right, thank you.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Yes, through you, Mayor. On the topic of the third ice pad debenture that was taken on, if I recall correctly, and I could be wrong, so I mean the numbers would be something I'm interested in here. I recall that majority of the Nith River Promenade was actually going to be funded through reserves and grants. So I'm curious to sort of know what's changing on the back end there to take on that full 400 and some odd thousand that it is.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Salonen. So in the 2023 capital budget, there was an additional request for funding to complete the promenade project, which costs escalated significantly from the initial budget timeframe. The source of funding for that, as indicated in the budget, was going to be $500,000 in debenture financing. So it was identified within the budget that that would be debt financed, that portion of the project. With the way the tender came in on that project, shifting these costs or this debt financing over to it will allow for enough money to be present, funding present within that project to complete it within the current calendar year as planned. So it's not a new revelation or new finding that this was going to be debt financed. The plan was to have it debt financed. What we came up with as a strategy here was saying, rather than issue more debt, why don't we take the debt that we're already paying on the third ice pad design, which is not happening immediately, not to say it's not happening, and use it towards that rather than issuing new debt. So again, the effort was to bring down the debt servicing costs in 2024 while the township starts to bring in additional funding through DCs and other sources.
Through you, Mayor, I don't disagree that we're lessening the debt funding moving forward. But my question is, I believe when we got that tender back, I can't remember the exact date, but when we got that tender, it was below what we had projected, and a good portion of it was not necessarily going to be debt funded. There were grants and other pieces involved as well. So I'm just curious, do you have those numbers available by chance?
I was trying to pull them up while you were.
I appreciate that.
While you were speaking. I do know that from a grant funding perspective, I don't have them in front of me, but I do know that we were eligible for about $70,000 in grant funding from the Rural Economic Development Fund, another $200,000 from the Canada Community Revitalization Fund. A portion of funding could come from DCs with the fact that it is considered somewhat growth related with the expansion of the trail, but the remainder was debt finance. So yes, it was a mix of funds, not completely debt. That's a nearly $1 million capital initiative, and approximately half is to be debt financed.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments, councillors? Okay, seeing none, I will now call the vote. All of those in, sorry, Councillor
Could we have you reread the motion just so it's clear what we're voting on then, please?
Yes. As I stare at all the numbers, I get to repeat again. But yes, so the recommendation is that report COR 2023-55 be received for information purposes, and further that council approve the issuance of development charges funded debentures towards the following approved 2023 capital program projects. New Parks Operation Facility for $3.55 million. Provisions for Public Works Facilities Expansion for $1,080,000. Union Street Storm Outlet Replacement for $104,500. And Bridge Street number 34-B-T9 $300,680, and further that staff be directed to postpone issuing debt for the Snyders Road, Foundry Street, and Baden Trunk sanitary sewer project until further analysis is completed and presented to council, and further that staff reassign the existing levy-funded debenture for $484,750 from the Third Ice Pad project to the Ninth River Promenade project is the recommendation that we are voting on.
Thank you, Mayor Sellen.
You're welcome. Councillor Wilkinson?
Through you, Mayor, could we get that vote recorded, please?
Yes, in that case, I will turn it over to the clerk.
Okay. Mayor Salonen.
In favor?
Councillor Cressman.
In favor.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Opposed?
Councillor Sadhu.
In favor.
Councillor Dunstall.
In favor.
Councillor Martin.
In favor.
The motion carries.
Thank you very much. We are now on to item 12.3, and the recommendation is that the report COR 2022 to 2026 term of council annual review of council rules of procedure be received, and that staff be directed to bring forward the proposed procedural bylaw attached to corporate services report COR 2023-54 to as attachment number 2 to the September 11th, 2023 regular council meeting for consideration. May I please have a mover to get this on the table? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Martin. And I will now call back on our Manager of Legislative Services and Clerk Jeff Bunn to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mayor Salonen. This report before you tonight, Council, is to provide you with a suggested series of changes to the procedural bylaw. The Municipal Act of 2001 requires that the Township adopt a bylaw governing the calling of the place and proceedings of council meetings. At the Township of Wilmot, the current bylaw 2021-36 meets the legislative requirements and provides the rules of procedure for council, special council, closed, and advisory committee meetings. I'll highlight the purpose of using parliamentary procedure is to facilitate the conduct of business in meetings so that the deliberate will of the majority is achieved while still protecting all members' rights. The bylaw before you today, I believe, does that by providing a set of procedural rules for council to follow moving forward if you so choose to adopt. I'll highlight in the report today, there is a line that was cut off, and I apologize for that, highlighting that our solicitor, in accordance with the current bylaw, has reviewed the bylaw itself, the draft bylaw, and provided just some minor clerical corrections, but has no concerns with what's being put forward today. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wilkinson.
Through you, Mayor. First off, Director Bunn, thank you for putting this together. I'm curious, a couple questions here. I'll start with the first one. Is it possible, or have you seen other municipalities potentially require that delegations provide a proof of residence in order to delegate?
Through you, Mayor, I have been asked that previously, so I did look into it, and I could not find a municipality in Ontario that does require that.
Through the chair, if you had to estimate on average, I mean, what percentage of delegations do we get that are potentially from outside of the township?
Through you, Mayor, I wouldn't even want to guess. I wouldn't know. I think in terms of putting such a process in place, my frank analysis would be very difficult to do. Part of my concern, part of my role as clerk is to also protect the privacy of our citizens through what information we collect as a municipality. And I think putting the responsibility on staff to check IDs, for instance, or to ask members of the public to scan their IDs, whatever that looks like, that process would concern me in the sense of what are we using that information for? How is that information being shared publicly? How is it being stored? Like, there's a number of series of concerns I would want to see addressed. But in terms of a best practice, I have not seen that done before.
Follow-up for Councillor Wilkinson, and then we'll go to Councillor.
That's okay. I think just in general, or through the chair, I think in general it's more so just to streamline the business to make sure that we're receiving delegates that are actual residents of the township. We know that there are some hot button issues that can potentially bring in commentary from outside of the Township of Wilmot in particular. Don't know that we would necessarily need to record that information, but to your point, I appreciate what you're saying. Thank you.
And Councillor Martin.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Salonen. My question is to Councillor Wilkinson about your question, just so I understand. Are you saying that your preference or your belief is that we should only have delegations from people who reside in the township?
So through the chair, yeah, I do. I think it's appropriate when we have certain professional bodies or organizations that we've invited or have a particular area of expertise to speak on reports or public meetings. I think that that's totally appropriate. However, at the end of the day, I think everybody here lives in Wilmot, intends to represent Wilmot, and I think that's the business that this body is tasked with conducting. So I do have the belief, whether that's wrong or right, that our delegations and the input received at this body should be purely from residents of Wilmot, not necessarily taxpayers or landowners, but people that live and work in this township.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson.
You're welcome.
Councillor Dunstall.
Through you, Mayor, I just wanted to say that I agree with Councillor Wilkinson 100%, and I also understand your dilemma, so I get why it would be very difficult to do. It's unfortunate, because I do think that it's very important to make sure it's the people who live here, because that's the business we're conducting, are the ones that get to delegate.
Councillor Cressman.
Yes, reading 44 pages of procedural bylaw was kind of watching paint dry, but we'll leave that where it is. But I was interested in the reduction in time from 7 minutes to 5 minutes. And in general, is that what we're seeing in other municipalities bordering?
Through you, Mayor, again. It's all over the place, to be quite honest. A majority of actually I shouldn't even say there's a majority in Waterloo region. The region itself does 5 minutes. The larger cities are at 5 minutes, and the townships are between 5 minutes and 10 minutes, depending on where you are. I did survey, please don't go, think about 30 municipalities where I actually charted them, and there was really no consensus. It's really across the board. Again, the point of that is just to facilitate your most efficient meeting that you can, get as many delegates in a meeting in a timely way, respecting that other people's times and their schedules may not permit for them to be at council and waiting to have their chance to speak. So that's where that recommendation comes from.
And as a follow-up, as I read it, I think I understood it, we can be flexible on that based on the number of delegates. I guess we can't reduce it to under 5, but we could expand it if there was a small number of delegations and had the time to do it. Is that correct?
So through you, Mayor, actually both. So I've seen it both ways, where if you had 20 delegates, for instance, you could pass a motion of council to reduce the time. That's not always across the board in every municipality, but I've seen it done. More often than not, you'll see councils extend the time by a minute or two just to let people finish, and we've seen that be in practice at Wilmot as well, to accommodate people just to wrap up their comments and give them a warning. But,
Councillor Martin.
I have, through you, Mayor Salonen, I have 2 questions. May I, should I just ask one and then, or, so the first one would be a follow-up just regarding delegations, and to you, Manager Bunn, that I'm wondering, is it possible to find out in advance so that it would be on our agenda whether or not we have delegations and who the delegations are?
Through you, Mayor, absolutely, we can do that. If that's what the council would like to see, we can certainly list delegations. That's fine.
Can we just make note of when that's logistically not possible, if they're
absolutely.
like
so
tonight's delegate?
Yeah, good point. There are public meetings, for instance, where we do not limit the individual's right to just attend council and stand up and speak when they so choose during that portion of the meeting. So public meetings are a little bit different, but when we know in advance that somebody's registered, we can certainly add that to the agenda prior to publishing. So we do 2 publishings, as you may have picked up on. We do the Wednesday afternoon, and then we also publish an addendum agenda on Fridays for anything that's been added, removed, or changed, so we can capture it there too.
Did you have a second question?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Salonen. Councillor Cressman, if you are opposed to me reporting on a conversation that you and I had at AMO, that's the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, please let me know afterwards. But Councillor Cressman and I were having a conversation about decorum and propriety, and that is in this series of bylaws in terms of behavior of councillors. And at the AMO, there was conversation, or there were people raising concerns that across Ontario, there are times that people are subject to harassment, councillors, municipal or staff are being harassed. There can be gender violence, there can be difficulties, and so numerous people were speaking up about this topic. And Councillor Cressman, you and I were discussing, well, why isn't that already in place in terms of the rules that are already in place in the bylaws? And so I'm not necessarily asking for any changes to this, and certainly I like the way things are written, and I do think it's very important that we treat each other respectfully and that we have a respectful environment and that nobody is subject to harassment. So I'm just curious if people have any comments on that. Do we believe that we're adequately speaking to that topic based on what's happening across Ontario and what's being discussed at AMO? And so I'm curious if any of my colleagues or anybody around the horseshoe has any further comments on that.
I mean, my one comment, but I think you're about to cover it because I can see you pulled it up, was the conduct for meetings, I think does cover it, but is there something in particular beyond that part that you would like to see? I certainly understand where you're coming from, and I agree. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean, and I think that's part of the dilemma that Councillor Cressman and I were discussing is, well, what are some of these examples, where I know I have read in the news about one councillor swearing at another councillor, and I would have thought that those rules, that would be definitely inappropriate and that people can be called on their behavior and actually ejected from the meeting. I don't know. I guess I'm hoping that we can move forward in a more respectful. no, I don't mean more here, I just mean across Ontario. How can we support what's happening in terms of maintaining, continuing, promoting a healthy, respectful environment?
Most certainly. Did you want to comment on the conduct and meeting?
Yeah, so, thank you, Mayor. So through you, Mayor, I would suggest that Section 8.1, meeting decorum for all members present, does capture the interactions between members of council. The challenging part, of course, is delegations. However, our delegations are given the rules ahead of time, and we do give them a much slimmed down version than what you're seeing here, but we do advise them that the language matters, and if they are stepping outside the bounds of what normal meeting behavior or protocol would be, that it would be the mayor as the chair to jump in, and I say that kindly, jump in, but certainly to advise the individual that they need to follow the rules that have been outlined for all members. And we have to keep in mind that the procedural bylaw, that's its goal, right, is to facilitate efficient meetings and to make sure that you have rights as a member, whether you're on the majority side or on a minority side, and that those rights are being protected. And at any time that a member does feel that their rights are being infringed on, they have the ability to procedurally ask for the chair to make a ruling on that and speak to it.
Very good. Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, I'd like to come back and revisit the proposed time change from 7 to 5 minutes. I think there's some valid points all around, but I'm curious to maybe hear what my colleagues have to think. I know in seeing delegations conduct themselves, sometimes it can be under 7 minutes comfortably, under 5 minutes comfortably. But my concern is that if we do set that cap to 5 minutes, are we then really putting pressure on the delegation to prepare to try and get as much information as they can into those 5 minutes, potentially missing some important pieces? And as much as I was just saying in a former point, we're looking at, I'd prefer to see a system where we're hearing from residents of this township only, but I don't want to limit the residents that do come to speak or the delegations that do come to speak just to 5 minutes. I think they should have that right and that access to have a little bit more time. And oftentimes we do extend, but I just worry that if we set it to 5 minutes, does that then change the presentations we're seeing? Does that change the level of detail and content that we're seeing when people are taking their time for something that they're clearly passionate about to come here and speak on? So I'm curious.
Councillor Stu.
Through the mayor, historically, how did we get to the 7 minute mark for delegations? Is that something that you're aware of? Or?
I'm not aware.
Through you, Mayor, that does predate me here, but I believe shortly before I arrived, it was requested by a member of council during the debate when the procedural bylaw was updated to increase the time from 5 minutes to 7. So just in my experience, what I've seen in municipalities is typically 5. And at that point, for whatever reason, council had wanted to allot a bit more additional time, and I think they did receive some delegations at that point as well, requesting additional time.
Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I also think that, if you look at the extra 2 minutes, which is important, but if you look at the extra 2 minutes for 5 people, that's 10 minutes. That's 2 more delegations that we could listen to. And I know that some of our subjects certainly warrant a lot of delegations, and we get them, but I think trying to get as many people to have their viewpoints presented to this council is important. So the 5 minutes may help to do that.
I think one other thing as well, a lot of the items that would bring a lot of people, I would imagine most certain historically looking, most of them have often the same points. And certainly something that I as chair have been trying to do is reiterating, most certainly please share when you agree with the person who spoke prior to you or somebody who spoke prior, but please don't repeat information again, which I think can help with the nuances of the time being limited down. One thing I'm curious, because I know that there is shared tonight some people who don't want people who don't live in the community to be able to necessarily come and speak to council, also noting that you can still call and email council, that delegating in council meeting is not the only way to contact us, nor is it the only way for your voice to be heard. However, is it, and this is a question that can be yes, no, or you can look into, is it possible if you are not a resident of Wilmot that we give you time, but it's limited time, like less than a prioritized resident who actually lives here? Just a question. I can leave that with you. You can bring that back when this comes back, September 11th. You can think on that. I know I'm catching you off guard on that. Just something to kind of throw out to council in general. Councillor Cressman.
Yeah, yes, through you, Mayor. The question is, does the honor system work where you would say priority will be given to Wilmot residents, and if you're outside the township, you will have an opportunity at the end of the period to present your views. So again, you're not policing, you're not taking information, but you're relying on the honor system. I know the one thing that I was interested in London, in the speaking to the Association of Ontario Municipalities, was the Bear Pit session, and it was indicated that only elected officials could ask questions, and the first question came from a professional engineer for one of our major cities in the region. And I thought, what part of listening to the rules of order didn't you get? And so anyhow, so I mean, it doesn't always work, but at the end of the day, I think if you had, nothing against engineers, Jeff, but I think part of that is to see if, you could institute that without legislating it and without a heavy hand.
Councillor Sadoo.
Just to echo what my fellow Councillor Wilkinson was stating, I am kind of in favor of just keeping the 7 minutes strictly for the fact that when delegations come here, it is essentially public speaking, and a lot of people aren't quite used to that or comfortable with that. And historically, I've seen a lot of, it averages out. A lot of people will use less than the 7 minutes. Some will go right up to the 7 minutes. But I think if we use the rules and have the chair essentially limit the repetition of the same thing over and over again, and we can kind of police it that way. But then giving each delegation what they're used to, the 7 minutes that we've had up until now, and they can kind of play with that as they may, if they are long-winded like myself, or if they're quick and to the point like my fellow councillor, Mr. Cressman.
Very good. Staff, do you need any actual direction from what we're talking, or are you happy to take these notes and bring back on?
Through you, Mayor, I'm happy to take it back. Just so I get a general idea, are we looking for a bylaw that comes back with 7 minutes? Is that sort of where we're headed?
We could, or just a general nod. Or is anybody really opposed to it coming back with 7? It's more so just for staff direction so that they know what they're bringing back. Councillor Cressman.
I think status quo on the 7 minutes, and if we felt that we had to reduce it, we can do that as the motion of the meeting at such time, so we could adjust on the fly. But I hear the points made, and I'm not as short-winded as my colleague would suggest.
Councillor Dunstan.
I agree, having listening to Councillor Wilkinson, I agree. The 7 minutes probably makes sense to just keep it as it is. So there you go.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, and thank you for everybody chiming in on that point. I do appreciate it. I want to clarify a couple things quickly. I'm not against hearing opinions from outside residents. It's more so just in terms of the actual in-person delegates. I appreciate more so the professionalism and the interest level of the actual residents. But to your point, we do receive email and correspondence and voicemail from external residents or regional residents as well, so that's okay. And then finally, I do have a question for staff here. Is it possible at the next meeting, just in the package, can we get I appreciate you including sort of the revised or proposed bylaw, but can we get a copy or potentially a summary of the notes that very much detail the changes? So this was stricken, this was put in.
Through you, Mayor, certainly we can pull something together. It's a fresh bylaw compared to what we've had, so like a red line version doesn't exist, to be quite honest. It was two word documents, but we can put together a comprehensive list of what those changes are. Yes.
Very good. Any other questions or comments, councillors or staff for that matter? Okay. Seeing none, just a reminder that we are voting for this report to be received and that staff be directed to bring forward the proposed procedural bylaw attachment to the corporate services report, attachment number 2, to our September 11th meeting. So we will be voting on the September 11th meeting then of the final draft of the procedural bylaw that the comments have been taken back for. Okay, so seeing no more questions or comments, I will call the vote. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. We have correspondence items 13.1 through to 13.6. Does anybody want to pull for any comments? Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, I'd like to pull out 13.1, the North Dumfries resolution regarding ICBLs.
Please go ahead.
Ultimately, I read through it, and I certainly appreciate the efforts that North Dumfries is taking to explore some of this and having their staff certainly investigate different bylaws and different policies that can be put in place to help with the policing or control of gravel pits. And in particular, we know that this region or this township is affected by gravel pits as well. So hats off to North Dumfries for this. And I don't know if we require a motion on this, but I certainly hope that our staff, or if the staff care to comment, that they will pursue these conversations as we have a secondary plan and other items upcoming that warrant at least a good conversation with our neighbors here.
Very good. Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none. Moving along to bylaws. Again, just note that bylaw 14.1 has been removed from this evening's agenda, and that we will actually only be voting on bylaw 14.2. In that case, may I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Dunstall. All those in favor? And that carries. And we do not have any notice of motions this evening. On to announcements. We have quite a few, so just bear with me. The first one, just wanted to note, I know it's been mentioned already slightly, but most of council and myself were in London along with CAO Chambers earlier, I guess it was last week now, for AMO, which is all the municipalities in Ontario. For an annual conference. We had multiple delegations, both with just the townships and some of our rural colleagues and different ministries, as well as the region. We had multiple different delegations with ministries, and there was lots of learning opportunities as well. So it was a really great conference, and I think very productive, and certainly learned a lot. But if any councillors wanted to make note of anything in particular that they had. Yes, Councillor Cressman. I think
the two items that developing age-friendly communities was one that struck me on the first day on the Sunday afternoon. And I think I don't say I have, a list of things, but I think part of it is to do a in-depth survey of your communities and figure what the gaps are and develop a plan of action and then evaluate what your action, where you are able to address gaps. And I think given that we have a number of communities in our township for, I wouldn't say seniors, but people of a definitive age, and given that I likely represent that demographic, it maybe was of special interest to me. And so I think it's something about whether, how can we support that segment of our constituents and address the gaps that exist in our township. So I found that quite interesting as one of the ones that I participated in.
Very good. And Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Salonen, thank you. I certainly enjoyed attending 3 days at the AMO. One seminar that I attended was on Indigenous relations, and one of the comments that were made that if in our community we work on protecting Indigenous women, we are going to be creating or maintaining communities that are safe for all people. And so given the fact that there's missing and murdered Indigenous women across Canada, that seemed like a very good point. And on the one hand, it may seem exclusive to focus on one group, and yet it made so much sense that if we focus on safety of Indigenous women, that it's going to create safety for all people. Another seminar I attended was on the Blue Box program, and realizing that in Waterloo Region we're in the opt-out phase. So I'd be curious if my colleagues would have been able to say whether we're opt-in or opt-out. I heard from 2 different municipalities, one that is opt-in and one that is opt-out. My understanding is we're opting out by the spring of 2024. So I don't know if there would be some information that we might want to spread in terms of that opt-out program for Waterloo Region and what that means to us. I think that would be interesting. And the third point of interest was attending a tour of the West 5 Sifton development project, where when they're finished, there will be 5,000 people living in that community. It's also a community for retail and commercial space. And also it's being powered totally by solar power, so that during the day in the summer, they're providing enough electricity to put some back into the grid. That was quite impressive to see a totally solar-powered community.
Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I certainly attended some very interesting sessions on housing, but one of the things that I went on was the tour that I went on was for the East Lyons Community Center, and Director Catania. There were some really great learnings there. I had talked to them about if they had programs for teenagers, because that seems to be a demographic that we really don't have anything that's solid for them, and they do, and they work very closely with that demographic, as well as having a kitchen where they could have cooking classes, and their gymnasium was huge, and it accommodated basketball and the famous pickleball, which everyone seemed to ask for. So there were certainly a lot of things that I thought when we do go to the third ice pad, that perhaps we could incorporate some of these things so that it included the entire community. They also had a lot of couches hanging around the fireplace, and they encouraged people to come and hang out there, which I thought was a really good thing to keep our people engaged and to have a safe place for them to go. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you very much, Councillor. So I think that's a pretty comprehensive summary of AMO. I also wanted to note all students returning back to school next week. Hope that you enjoy your last of summer and have a happy and safe start back to school. General PSA, that means if you're driving down Snyder's Road or in New Dundee past one of the speed cameras starting September 1st, they will be back to the 40s. So don't say I didn't warn you. And I did also want to make note, I guess it's one thing kind of remaining from AMO, that is regional business, but that we are expecting by September 11th at the latest. Minister Clark has said that he will be announcing the regional facilitator. So if you are interested in the ongoings of what the facilitator's mandate is and what that means for the region going forward, definitely keep your ears and eyes peeled, as that will be coming forward. Like I said, we were told by September 11th. At the latest, we would know, so an impending announcement. And now, lastly, and I've kind of pushed this one off to the end, is it kind of was mentioned and referenced throughout the meeting, but we do have our Director of Finance and our Treasurer's final meeting this evening. Director Kelly has been here for over 18 years, served our township. And on behalf of council and myself, we want to thank you for all of your years of service and dedication to the citizens of Wilmot and the corporation. And we wish you all the best at your new role at the Township of Orangeville, and you will be missed. And I'm going to turn it over to CAO Chambers.
Yes, thank you. And I'd like to echo Mayor Salinen's comments and thank you for your contributions to the corporate leadership team over the past 18 years on behalf of the CLT, and wish you well in your future role. And further to that, I think there was, we also alluded to an incoming treasurer. So there is a bylaw on the agenda tonight to appoint Dan Elliott, who actually joined the township today. So we have a couple of days of overlap with Patrick as our interim treasurer, chief financial officer. So that takes effect as of September 1st. And Dan has a lengthy career in municipal finance, formerly holding roles as the Commissioner of Finance and Treasurer for the town of Richmond Hill and the Director of Finance and Treasurer for the town of Aurora. So we're welcoming Dan. And I'm also pleased to announce that our own Jeff Bunn will be assuming the role of Interim Director of Corporate Services effective September 1st. So in addition to his role as Manager of Legislative Services and Clerk, he's going to be providing day-to-day leadership to staff within the Corporate Services Department and participating as well as a member of the corporate leadership team. So we thank both Dan and Jeff for taking on those roles, as we're wishing Patrick well on his new adventure.
All right. And councillors, any other announcements that need to be had?
We could read an Irish lesson.
We can leave that for after the official meeting, but I look forward to that blessing. As for business arising from closed session, we, just to update councillors and the general public, we are dotting all of our I's and crossing our T's, and our clerk is bringing us up to best practice. So just that we vote on council receiving information from closed. And again, the information is 1A, a confidential verbal report regarding section 239(2)D, labor relations or employee negotiations, and section 239(2)B, personal matters about an identifiable individual. And also the second item, which was a confidential verbal report regarding confidential information supplied in confidence from the province of Ontario, section 239(2)H, information explicitly supplied in confidence to the municipality or local board by Canada, a province or territory or a crown agency of any item, and section 239(2)I, a trade secret or scientific, technical, commercial, or financial or labor relations information supplied in confidence to the municipality or local board, which, if disclosed, could reasonably be expected to prejudice significantly the competitive position or interfere significantly with the contractual or other negotiations of a person, group of persons, or organization. I really think that that's just a personal thing to get me to talk a lot more about what I already said at the start of the meeting, but to get that on the floor, may I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? Great, and that carries. And the confirmatory bylaw. Recommendation is that the confirmatory bylaw as attached to this agenda be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed in open council. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? That carries. And lastly, adjournment. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? And we're adjourned. Thank you very much.